Hey guys, so welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a long time, probably like 2 years or something like that. I wanted to make the first video about what I went through so that anyone else out there looking to find out whatever's going on with them, symptoms, how to deal with what I had, easier, because there isn't much information out there. Honestly, I don't think I had to solely rely on my doctors. So I have been gone for roughly 2 years and been through a lot of physical changes, emotional changes, growing up. Ever since I was diagnosed, I was diagnosed with an AVM on the right temporal lobe of my brain, so about like right here. It was about 4 centimeters large, which is kind of large for an AVM. It's on the large side. There is larger ones. An AVM is an arteriovenous malformation. It's something you're born with. They don't really have a link as to whether it's hereditary or not. Most people do not know that they have one until something tragic happens with the AVM. With me, I was actually extremely lucky as to how I found it. I found it through grand mal seizure. Most people find it through brain hemorrhaging, which is when you have a brain bleed. That's when the AVM ruptures. So just to backtrack a minute, I'll try and post a picture like right here of what an AVM looks like. It is an abnormal connection between veins and arteries in the brain, or on the surface of the brain. So normally, just to not get like too sciencey, I guess, you have an artery that gets slowed down by a capillary before it goes down into a vein, just like a high pressure water pipe. When blood flows through your system, it goes from an artery, which is larger, down through a capillary, which slows down the pressure before it flows out into veins, normal veins. An AVM is like a cluster of this mass without capillaries. So it goes from artery straight to vein without the capillary to slow it down. So it's going from the artery straight to the vein at high pressure, which is why most people find an AVM through brain hemorrhage, because there's so much high pressure going through there, it bursts and causes a brain bleed. And the other way that it's found is through seizure, grand mal seizure, which is how I found mine. Triggers for an AVM are caffeine, high blood pressure. If you see something going on with your sight, I found it specifically, I took a pre-workout powder. I was training to do a bikini competition, bodybuilding bikini competition. I took a pre-workout powder and I went to the gym to do chest. And you know, when you're working out, you know, you're forcing weight, you're increasing the blood pressure that goes up to your brain. So on top of that, I had taken a lot of caffeine, which was in the pre-workout powder, and I was working out, lifting weights. So there was an extreme amount of pressure, blood pressure going up there, plus the caffeine. I was actually extremely lucky that it didn't rupture. I did not have a brain bleed. I just, the first thing I noticed was bright multicolored flashing lights right in the center of my vision, and it started like closing in. I thought that I was gonna pass out. I thought, oh, well, I took too much pre-workout powder, I'm working too hard, I'm just about to pass out. I was with Dylan, my boyfriend, luckily, and I told him, something's wrong, I don't feel right, and I walked out of the building and went into his car, and he started to drive us home. In the car, I had the grand mal seizure. There's different types of seizures. A grand mal seizure is when you actually lose consciousness and you convulse. There's other seizures where you're actually awake and you're aware, and you're kind of just staring straight forward, but you can't really do anything. There's no control. But with a grand mal seizure, you lose consciousness and you're fully convulsing. So Dylan called 911, got in the ambulance. I don't remember the next 48 hours, to be honest. The memory is very blurry. I only remember bits and pieces from this, just from the seizure. I just don't remember much. I got transported to the nearest emergency room, which was Salem Hospital, which I'm not a fan of, sorry. But so they did a CAT scan and they saw something on my brain, and they were not really qualified enough to know what it was. So when they told me there was something on my brain, I immediately thought, oh my God, it's cancer, oh my God, it's cancer. Because I didn't know for a full 24 hours what it was. They transported me to another hospital who was more qualified to figure out what this type of thing was. They transported me to Christiana Hospital. They did their own scans there, MRI scans, CAT scans with contrast. And a doctor that's called a neurointerventionalist is the one that diagnosed me. And if you are diagnosed with an AVM, you most likely will have a doctor that's a neurointerventionalist. They are doctors that deal with the, I guess, cardiovascular system of the brain, is the best way I can describe it. So he knew that it was an AVM, it was not cancer. AVMs are not cancerous. Like I said before in the beginning of the video, it's just like an abnormal cluster of arteries or vessels that go to the veins with no capillary in between. So he diagnosed me and he immediately put me on an anti-seizure medication called Keppra. So if you're diagnosed with an AVM, the first thing that they're probably going to do is put you on a anti-seizure medication. I was on the anti-seizure medication for 2 years. Sorry if this is like jumbled, it's just so much information. I'm gonna try and fill in as much information as I can, but I was diagnosed in March 2016. That's when I had the grand mal seizure. That's when I was at the emergency room and got diagnosed. So at that point, that's when I went on the anti-seizure meds. And at the time they couldn't see any bleeding. There was possibly a micro bleed, but nothing significant. So the neurointerventionalist also got me in touch with a neurologist. You will get a neurologist as well. And they gave me kind of like an overview of what my options would be. The next step usually when you are diagnosed with an AVM is to get an angiogram. What that is it's a little small catheter that goes up the femoral artery. They cut into the groin of your leg on the side that the AVM is on, and they go up the femoral artery that way with a small incision. Usually you are awake for this. They give you like a sedative to kind of calm you down. And they go up the femoral artery and they go through around the heart, I believe, up into the carotid of whatever side the AVM is on. So mine was on the right side of my brain, so they were on the right side of my carotid. And they inject a dye, a lot of contrast dye while they're doing this. You're laying on an x-ray table, and they keep injecting the dye and they tell you to keep still. That's why you have to be awake, because they do tell you to hold your breath briefly for 2 or 3 seconds. They inject the dye and then they take a lot of pictures, like very quick pictures, so they can kind of get like a movie of the blood flow, so they can actually see a full 3D map of the AVM. So if anyone, if any of you know me watching this, I've had serious phobias with the hospital, with needles, with all this stuff. So this entire 2 years has been a true test to what I can deal with emotionally. It was a very, well, besides the point. So yeah, they do the angiogram, they go through the femoral artery, they take the pictures in the movies, they get the 3D map of what the AVM looks like, the size, the depth, if it's rooted in the brain or not, which mine was very deeply rooted. This way they can go forward with the type of treatment, whether that be gamma knife radiation, CyberKnife radiation, whether they decide to operate. If it's operable, they can open up your skull and remove it. And there's, I believe, it's the glue. Embolization, that's what it was. I had to look it up because I couldn't remember the word. But they sometimes will inject a glue to block off the AVM with embolization, which is actually not used solely on its own very often. They usually will do a combination of maybe coiling and embolization, or a combination of radiation and embolization. Or they will operate and take maybe part of it out, and then whatever is left, they will do embolization. So it's unique to the person, depending on the size of the AVM, the shape of it, how it's rooted, where it's located. AVMs aren't always necessarily on the brain. Most of the time they are, but I've heard of some people who have them on the lung. So most of the time they are on the brain, which is an unfortunate place. But some people have them on the motor cortex, some people have them on the brain stem, some people have them in their spinal cord. Some people have them on the left temporal lobe, the frontal lobe, or like mine was on the right temporal lobe. So the location all depends on, your treatment will depend on the location as well. So, yeah, I was diagnosed in March 2016, and they told me probably my best option was CyberKnife radiation. Mine was inoperable because it was deeply rooted. If your AVM is deeply rooted, it most likely cannot be operated on because it's too risky for brain damage during the surgery. Some things to note that I wish I knew beforehand that the doctors did not tell me. It is a rare thing to have an AVM. I think 1% of the population gets diagnosed with an AVM, so it's not a very common thing to have. So there's not really an abundant amount of information out there about it like there is for some other diseases. And it is treated similarly to how cancer is treated when it comes to radiation. They will put you on steroids, a high dose of steroids. I was on dexamethasone, which is the strongest steroid, a medical steroid. There's, for example, if you've ever heard of prednisone, that's a type of medical steroid, prednisolone. But dexamethasone is a very, very potent steroid. And if I remember correctly, don't quote me on this, but I think it's something like 7 times more potent than prednisone. Dexamethasone is often used with radiation treatment to the brain because it's very effective in reducing brain swelling. When you have radiation done to your brain, you will most likely get swelling immediately after treatment. It's like a sunburn on the brain is kind of how they described it. It's not that you feel burning or anything, but it gets inflamed, it gets irritated because you just had radiation treatment. So I know this is a lot of information, a lot to understand, you know, if you've gotten diagnosed with one. Just know that, you know, there is help out there. There is, I'm gonna link all this stuff down below because it really helped me. There is a website called avmsurvivors.org. There's a couple Facebook groups that I became a member of later on that I found, AVM Survivors. There's a couple others that I'm gonna list, so feel free to join those because every question is answered in there, and if it hasn't been, you can ask the question, and so many people are willing to reach out. So my option was CyberKnife radiation, which is a strong, concentrated, precise dose of radiation to the area, and I was going to get 3 doses of this, so 3 separate days of treatment. So depending on your AVM, you may have more, you may have less. What it looks like in the room is, you know, well, before you get the treatment, they will make a mask for you, a mesh mask. If you remember like an art class, there's like a mesh that you wet and then you put it over your face and it's really wet, and then it dries a little bit and you take it off and it's an exact replica of your face. That's how they make the mask for you. With Gamma Knife, I believe you have to have a head frame kind of bolted to your skull that keeps you still, and it allows them to precisely use the machine to aim where they need to aim. With CyberKnife, it's the same thing except it's less invasive. It's just a mesh mask that they mold to the face to your face, and then that clips onto the table. So you wear your mask for every treatment, and then you take it off. You lay flat on the table, and this like car assembly arm looking thing comes out, and you know it'll come really close to your head, and you'll hear it kind of like power up, and you don't feel anything. There's no pain during the treatment, the radiation treatment. There's nothing. You feel nothing. And it kind of moves around the room and hits you from different angles. So even if it's on, like, for example, my right side, it would come in from the left side and shoot around and come to the front and all that stuff. It's avoiding like optic nerves and things like that, so it doesn't destroy anything that we don't want to destroy. So I did 3 days of this treatment. Each treatment was about 45 minutes long, and then you would just go home, and you know, you can drive, but my mom drove me. I did get some headaches afterwards. Now, here's what I wish the doctors told me was that the steroids will make you gain weight. They will make you gain weight. I was only supposed to be on the steroids for 3 weeks. Now, here's the thing. With AVMs, I feel like with CyberKnife radiation, it is not known well enough. Depending on the size of your AVM, since mine was larger, around 4 centimeters, that treatment area is quite large for CyberKnife radiation. They usually like to stick to less than that. I think they like to stick to around 3 centimeters or less, because it can get so inflamed. It's very irritating for the brain. but we went ahead and did mine anyway, and even though it was probably the right choice, it was a lot of hell because my brain did not like it whatsoever. I went through severe brain swelling. After 3 weeks of being on the steroids, I started briefly before I had treatment, just so that it was in my system, and then I was supposed to go off of them after 3 weeks, which is no big deal. You won't really typically see too much weight gain. You won't see too much of moon face, which is where your face kind of gets rounded from the steroids. The same thing happens if you go on prednisone. It's like water weight, and your cheeks get kind of like a chipmunk. And you know, it is what it is. They're there to help you. I get that. So I tried going off of the steroids after 3 weeks like I was supposed to, and I started seeing bright flashing lights again like I did before I had the seizure, and I had to go immediately back on the steroids because I was at risk for having a seizure even though I was on the anti-seizure meds. Even though you're on that medication, it doesn't guarantee that you're not going to have a seizure. It just helps. So they were afraid that I was going to have another seizure because there was brain swelling. So I had to stay on the steroids for another month. And every time I tried to get off of them, the symptoms would get worse and worse and worse. And I just was having a very hard time getting off of them because the brain swelling was so severe from the radiation. Honestly, looking back on it now, after everything that I know, the doses that I got were probably too strong, and the area that was treated probably was a little bit too large to be treated with CyberKnife. So now it's October, and I still have severe brain swelling, and they know this because they will do MRIs with contrast dye that will show brain swelling. I'll post some of my actual pictures here that show my brain swelling. And then after October, in December, I tried to go off again. This was the worst time that I had because I actually had stroke-like symptoms and fell, lost my balance, my speech started to slur, I wasn't making any sense, and the left side of my face started to droop a little bit. So my mom thought, oh, immediately she's having a stroke because of the brain swelling, because a stroke can be caused by lack of oxygen to the brain. Thus, I had such bad brain swelling, and so on. So I got rushed they took me to the emergency room, and they did a scan, and my swelling was out of control. And this was because I was just so adamant on getting off the steroids. I wasn't taking them at that point for a couple days, but my body just wasn't ready. My brain was not ready. It was still severely swollen, probably the worst it had ever been, and this was 6 months post CyberKnife. At that point, they put me on a very high dose of dexamethasone steroids via an IV. I was admitted to the ICU. It was just my first time I was admitted to the ICU. And I was in there for 3 days, and at that point I was on so much of a dose of steroids. I had gained a significant amount of weight, a lot, and this is just what steroids do, and you can control some of this by eating better. And steroids make you very hungry, very, very hungry. They thin out your skin. They're not great to be on long term. They're just not. It's only meant for a brief period of time, and at this point I was on them for 6 months. So I had gained a lot of weight, which I was kind of in denial about. I've always been very tiny. So I had to deal with this emotionally. And I just wanted to get off of them so bad, but I couldn't because, obviously, clearly I almost, they didn't say that it was a stroke, but I did lose the left side of my peripheral vision. After that incident, I still don't have that back. That is permanently gone, so some type of brain cells must have died from that incident. So that sight is gone. I can't see, from here over, really. It's completely black. But other than that, nothing else was wrong. I have full mobility, my speech, the left side of my face came back. I couldn't smile at the time correctly. But I was admitted to the ICU. They saw how bad the swelling was, and they put me back on steroids for another couple months. So now we're fast forwarding to April. And at this point, I was still waiting for the AVM to close off from the radiation. That's what radiation does. It shrivels up those that clump of vessels that are abnormal, and it kind of just shrivels and dies so that the AVM is no longer existent. And there's no more threat at that point after gamma knife or CyberKnife radiation. But at this point, I was just strictly dealing with the brain swelling from treatment. At this point, you know, we're getting into winter, like farther into winter, January, February, March. I'm still on the steroids, and I gained a little over 50 pounds, which is a lot for someone who's 5'1". So, you know, I was 110 before I got diagnosed with an AVM. After I got diagnosed with the AVM and got put on steroids, I was about 161, which is a lot. So not only that, I was so depressed. My AVM still wasn't gone. I had severe brain swelling. I was forced to be on these steroids that were making me the way that I looked. I had severe moon face from the steroids. I had severe water retention, and every time I would try to go off the steroids, that's another thing. If you're in the process of trying to get off steroids and wean off of them, they do wean you off of a taper. They'll cut it in half or a quarter even of a pill every couple days. It's very painful. Your joints feel like they're being torn apart, at least mine did. I would have to kind of like float in the bath because my knees would hurt so bad from getting tapered off the steroids. It feels like you have arthritis, severe arthritis, when you're coming off of steroids. The reason being is because being on steroids kind of numbs, I don't want to say numbs, but you don't feel joint pain while you're on them. But when you come off of them, it's like all hell breaks loose. Your joints feel like they're being pulled apart, they're on fire. You're very emotional when you're on steroids. I did have a lot of anger when I was on steroids. A lot of water retention. It was very emotional. It was a very dark place. I think that's the darkest place I've ever been in my entire life, most depressed I've ever been because of how I looked while I was on them. And just dealing with the AVM, I was scared to death every day that it was going to rupture because it was still there. I was waiting for the radiation to do its job, which can take 2 or more years for radiation. It's not a thing that happens instantly. Radiation takes time. Radiation works over time to close off vessels for an AVM. Just like with cancer treatment, when they treat a tumor, the radiation works more over time, so it's not something that's an instant treatment. So I was scared, you know, every day of this AVM rupturing, and they give you a list of things that you can't do now that you have this AVM. So you can't work out, you can't do any type of heavy lifting, just like if you're moving or something like that, you can't lift heavy things, you can't drink any caffeine whatsoever. Things that could set off the AVM and cause it to rupture. So not only was I on a high dose of steroids, I wasn't allowed to work out, so there was nothing I could really do to stop the weight gain, except I would say probably going on a keto diet would have helped, which I didn't know at the time, and I was kind of in denial about what was happening. And I just know I was hungry all the time, so I kept eating. Going from someone who's been tiny all their life to all of a sudden gaining 50 pounds on these steroids and dealing with a medical condition, I just was not in the right place mentally. Thank God I had Dylan and my boyfriend and my family to get me through that mentally. Not only that, I was training to compete for a bikini bodybuilding competition before this happened, and I was just like, wow, this really took a turn for the opposite side. I just ended up looking disgusting to me. But some things you can't help. It's a medical issue. You got to do what you got to do to keep yourself alive. Get through it. That's my advice. Just do what you got to do to get through it, and then once it's over, you can do what you need to do. So come late April 2017, I'm still on steroids, and it's been a year since my grandma's seizure. The AVM starts to show signs to concave in, kind of like this, which means that it was dying. It was shriveling up from the radiation, which was a good sign, which was actually very early. They did not expect to see that so early, which is also another sign that radiation, the CyberKnife radiation, was probably too much. Usually they don't typically start to see the AVM shriveling away until 2 years. So the fact that I was seeing it just about a year after was quick.
So they start to see it shrivel up. I was still on the anti-seizure meds, still on the steroids. I had gotten some information, and I think this is the most important part about the whole video here, is one doctor brought to my attention this treatment that cancer patients use called Avastin. I'll put the full name here, it starts with a B, but I have no idea how to pronounce it still. But they use it in combination with chemotherapy with brain tumor patients to reduce brain swelling from radiation treatment. And it works somehow where the molecules kind of like suck up whatever causes the swelling. And it's not really approved for patients that have AVMs because you don't have cancer. That's just how health insurance works. I hate health insurance. They gave me such a hard time. But Avastin in combination with chemotherapy works for cancer patients for radiation treatment. Now, they wanted to give me Avastin for my brain swelling because I had radiation treatment, but because I didn't have cancer, the health insurance said no. I kept getting denied. And Avastin is very expensive. It's about $30,000 a dose, which is ridiculous. I don't know where they get these prices from. But I got denied several times. I appealed it, got denied. Thankfully, I found a clinical trial that was administering Avastin through an angio, just like you would have an angiogram through the femoral artery into the carotid. You normally would have it done through an IV several times, but this clinical trial was having it done once through, doing an angiogram catheter. So I was, desperate at this point. I had finally gotten off steroids at the end of April. I was emotionally not in a good place. My AVM was still there. It was starting to show signs of shriveling away, but it was not completely gone. But I found this clinical trial, and I talked to the doctor over several months, and I got approved to do the clinical trial. It was free to get the medicine. I just had to fly out to Kentucky, this hospital called Norton Brownsboro Hospital. Best hospital I've ever been to. Everyone is so helpful and nice there. The hospital is fantastic. Everybody knows exactly what they're doing there. The knowledge there is amazing. Everyone there knows their stuff. And they really sympathized with me because they had done this trial on some younger kids that were having the same issue. So I will post the information in the description box also. It's called the Liberti trial. I'll post all that down below. So come mid-September 2017, I fly out for the clinical trial. I have it done over the course, it was done in one day. It was a procedure where they actually do it through angiogram again. So this is my third angiogram. And they put you under for this one because it's just, they want to make sure, they do something where they break the blood-brain barrier before they release the Avastin into your system so that more of it gets to the swelling area, I guess. At that point, I had developed radiation necrosis, which happens from radiation treatment where it's just a dead mass of brain tissue from the radiation treatment. So the Avastin is going to, it's supposed to help reduce the radiation necrosis effects, which is the brain swelling. So soon after having my Avastin treatment, the headaches stopped. I don't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but during my whole journey with this, I was constantly getting severe headaches and migraines from the brain swelling because it was just so bad. Mostly on the right side of my head because that's where the AVM was in the swelling. And before I got the clinical trial treatment and before you get Avastin, it sounds like it's contradicting because Avastin can cause a brain bleed. So before you get Avastin, they had to make sure the AVM was closed off. So in June 2017, I got an angiogram again where they got the femoral artery, inject the dye to make sure that the AVM was closed off from the radiation treatment. Yeah, it was closed off after a year, which is quick. Shouldn't have been that quick, so that's like another sign that the radiation probably was too high of a dose. But yeah, after I got the treatment, the headaches and the migraines stopped like roughly 3 weeks after. I haven't really had any headaches since. And the left peripheral vision is permanently gone, but other than that, everything returned to normal. after the Avastin treatment. The swelling has gone down. I went for a 3-month follow-up in December 2017 for the clinical trial. I went for my follow-up, and the swelling has started to reduce significantly. You'll see that in the brain swelling picture I posted before this. The December 2017 one looks different than the others. You can see the reduction in swelling, which is great. And I go back for my 1-year follow-up at the end of August, like August 27th of this year, 2018. And I know I'll see further results because I haven't had any problems whatsoever. So after I got that treatment, that treatment saved my life. The Avastin treatment absolutely saved my life. So I highly recommend Avastin treatment if you are having a lot of post-radiation symptoms like I have had, like brain swelling, radiation necrosis, things like that. As long as your AVM is gone, and even if mine wasn't completely gone, I still probably would have done it. And there was a lot of doctors that suggested I shouldn't get it because of the risk of brain bleed, but if I listened to them, I would not be where I'm at now. And if you're going through this, you will get through it. I promise you will get through it. It's a long journey, but I would say, be thankful for where you're at now. I'm so thankful that I didn't, die from a rupture. I'm so thankful that I didn't have a rupture. I'm so thankful that I'm even here. Because now it's March 2018, 2 years since my diagnosis. I've lost all the weight. I'm back, training to compete for my bodybuilding competition. I've been training since the week after I got my Avastin treatment. I got right back on board. I just wanted to be normal again, and I'm set to compete at the end of May this year. I'm 9 weeks out at this moment, and it's just, I'm so thankful to be here. So thankful to be back to normal. I cannot say thank you enough to my family and to my boyfriend Dylan for being there for me emotionally and physically, and just for everything. Everyone was there for me at my clinical trial. Thank you to all my friends that were there for me and understood. I was hiding for a good year there, or more, because I just hated what the steroids did to me, and I was just miserable, and I was in pain all the time. The head pain was just horrible. But life is not easy. It's never going to be easy, and no matter how old you are, I was 23 when I was diagnosed with this. Anything can happen, and just be thankful. When you wake up, be thankful for what you have. And now every day, just find something positive. Every day I wake up now, I'm just like, there's so much that drives me every day now because of what I went through. I look at life completely differently now. I appreciate everything, and you never know what somebody is going through. You never know. I wasn't very open about it. Some people knew what I was going through, and I eventually started posting about it, the pictures and whatnot. But I would hide away in my house, and that's one thing I would suggest not doing if you're going through this. All I had was like my mom and Dylan, and I would just hide, and I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want anyone to see me the way that I was, because that's not how I am. I hate just the depression that I was in. Reach out to the people in the support groups, because they will help you. There was times that I would just post that I was depressed, and people will sympathize and they will reach out to you because they know what it's like. If you're going through this, comment below. I will answer you. I know what it's like. So, I'm here. I'm happy. I'm healthy. I go back for my 1-year follow-up in August for the clinical trial, and I expect to only see good results. I know the swelling has gone down even more. But yeah, I've now been off of steroids for almost a year now, and I haven't been on seizure medication for a couple months now. So I'm completely medication free now. I'm 9 weeks out from a bodybuilding competition. I picked up right where I left off before the AVM, and I couldn't be happier to be where I'm at. And I just wanted to make this video before I made any other videos, just so I could share the symptoms I had in case you're having symptoms like that, or you don't know what an AVM is, or you don't know what to do, what treatments there are. If your story is similar to mine, hopefully maybe this could help somebody. And this was just to explain why I've been gone for 2 years and what was going on, and yeah, you know, someone is there, someone understands, someone's always gone through what you've gone through. And I just, you know, if you're going through this, reach out, and I feel for you. I really do. And, you know, I love you, and you will get through it. So that's it, guys.